Hi, my name is Jason Buffington. I'm the Senior Analyst of the Enterprise Strategy Group covering data protection. Today we're going to talk about the evolution of data protection licensing. The task of protecting data has undergone several disruptive technology developments over the last few years. Nightly tape backup transformed into more frequent backups to disk, then that transformed via deduplication, and that extended to the cloud. Similar evolutions are also evident in how data protection is licensed. First, we had agent-based licensing, and agent-based licensing meant that customers were required different agents and different flavors based on what they were protecting. SQL agents and Exchange agents and SharePoint agents, and even agents inside of workloads like desktops and endpoint devices. And while per-device licensing models are still in the market today, they are often more relegated to more predictable units of measure like cores in a hypervisor. For most, charging a backup license per device was cumbersome, as it was complicated to sell by the vendor, tracked by the partner, or deployed by the IT organization. And then a different metric, capacity-based licensing, came on the scene, and it made sense for just about everybody. Instead of paying per machine or per workload, one simply had to measure how much data had to be protected in aggregate. And this model is still in use today by most vendors. It's easier to administer, which makes it easier to sell, or acquire by the vendor, by the partner, by the customer. Capacity-based licensing also brings data protection software vendors in alignment with how storage vendors offer their capabilities, giving more of a turnkey match capacity between the hardware and software components. Capacity-based licensing also aligns with one of the other highly disruptive forces in data protection, cloud-based services. For most service providers around backup and storage, the only viable licensing model is capacity-based, whereby customers pay variably per month based on the amount of data being stored in the cloud provider's facility. An evolution of this pricing model became even more compelling as some solutions began licensing off the deduplicated protection set as opposed to the native production data set. For many organizations and their vendors, this appears to be an ideal model considering the rapid expansion of primary storage is often very deduplicatable and compressible. To their credit, many backup service providers have adapted their pricing models to accommodate deduplicated data, conceding that in many organizations, similar data sets are pervasive and they should be pared down in order to be less expensive to store and protect. But there is a problem. The flaw with any capacity-based licensing model today is that data is growing at a pace faster than the efficiencies of denser storage or the efficiency rates of deduplication, with the net result being an ever-growing data footprint and an increasingly larger capacity-based licensing bill to IT organizations. Take a look at this diagram. Drive density is improving, enabling you and your backup solution to store more gigabytes or terabytes per physical drive, and that should lower your physical storage footprint and therefore your costs. Deduplication continues to improve in efficiency, and that also should shrink your storage footprint and therefore your costs. But your data is growing at a faster rate than those two reduction forces combined, with the result being that your data protection storage footprint and therefore your costs continue to rise. Consider the math. Assume that you paid $1,000 for a typical backup server license, but then each year after that you paid an extra, say, 10–15% of that initial cost for patches, help desk support, ongoing service, etc. Or if you protected the same amount of capacity through a recovery licensing model, you might pay just a $150 backup fee up front. Now that's considerably lower short-term cost, is more in line with the typical maintenance fees of your existing solution. The trick then becomes avoiding the need to recover more than that $800 difference of what you might be saving so that you come out ahead. Long term, you're also going to save money because remember that as the growth of data from endpoint devices and large applications and VM sprawl is now outpacing the ability to dedupe. In other words, if your data growth rate is 40% annually and your deduplication is helping you cut that by a very impressive 75%, then your net data growth is still an incremental 10%. Paying the old way, you'd add 10% to that $1,000, so you'd have $100 in new costs. Compared with 10% on the new math, that's 10% of the $150, you'd only add $15 in new costs. The idea is that by changing the licensing model, you lessen your short-term budget outlay and then reset your long-term expenditures clock. If backup is like insurance, then why not pay for it like insurance, as spending a reasonable monthly premium for the compressed, deduplicated capacity that you really are consuming, and then a fee beyond that amount only for what you need to restore. Now, what does this mean to you? Now, if you're experiencing a very high amount of growth in your IT organization, then a recovery-centric licensing model may save your organization a considerable amount of money. Your production storage environment is likely continuing to grow because of those newer architectures, databases, big data, VM sprawl, unstructured file growth, etc. And you may also be seeing growth in the amount of business data stored in laptops and mobile devices. And if you're going to be successful as a responsible custodian of your organization's IT environment, all of that data has to be protected. Even if you deploy the most highly efficient dedupe technology you can find, your data and your capacity-based licensing model will continue to grow faster probably than what your backup budget increases annually. What if you're in an environment that has significantly less data growth than the industry average, maybe less than that 40% number? In that case, you may be experiencing just a little bit of annual backup growth, but in any scenario that you can imagine, you would likely only ever need to recover a small portion of what you're backing up. Again, a recovery-centric approach licensing may actually be right for you because it will enable you to stop paying for 100% of the data to be recovered when frankly you only need to recover 2 or 4%. Now, if you're working at a solution provider that's also offering backup services, you've got a couple other things to think about. You know, in many ways, you need to operate like a large enterprise that's supporting many business units and constituent departments. All the realities regarding raw data growth versus deduplicated data, budget growth, operating margin expenses, CapEx reduction, all of that still holds. The challenge of backup in a backup of a service environment is even greater than the challenge of delivering centralized backup in a large IT organization. It's harder because you don't get to gain the level of dedupe efficiency that a single enterprise often can. You see, with a single enterprise, chances are good that the data sets requiring backup have at least some common files and structures, and that'll ultimately increase your dedupe ratio. But you, as a multi-subscriber model, each of your clients' data is going to be different than another's. And that fact means that you're going to see far less dedupe efficiency across your broader storage pool. You will not have the luxury of tackling data growth as efficiently as an in-house IT team might. Recovery-based licensing could give you back control. In addition, if you're trying to introduce backup as a service to companies that have traditionally maintained their own data protection solution, you can use this new economic model of recovery-based licensing to perhaps lure some of those traditional customers into leaving their legacy approaches and move to a model that many of them will find appealing. For more insights on this, ESG recently published a white paper on what could be the world's first recovery licensing model from Asigra. I welcome you to take a look.